When I talk about being an anarchist, fundamentally, what I'm talking about is not so dissimilar from the personal philosophy of American libertarians. That being that personal responsibility and the free will inherent to humanity are going to be the governing forces in our lives, and that by taking hold of these things, we can live more fulfilling lives. But that also comes with certain consequences. Like, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. This entails a degree of suffering and, of course, the chance to make the wrong choice, as does, any set of choices you could make. There's going to be times where you make the wrong one. When I say I want quote unquote anarchism, what I'm basically saying, when you pull us back from all of the talk of direct democracy and worker cooperatives and these things that I generally advocate for, the personal philosophy at the root of all of it is this fundamental belief in choice, in the idea that if human beings were empowered to have as much choice as humanly possible in a world where they can be as educated as possible on the potential outcomes of their choices, then I think we can have a happier society. Firearms come to play in this, hypothetical world. I don't believe in restrictions on firearms. Of course I don't, because I don't believe in the state. I believe in the abolition of the state, albeit through non-violent means, but I believe in the abolition of the state. Um, and so, of course, in a world where there's no state, there's not going to be any regulations on firearms. Um, but there could be like community means by which uh, the control of arms uh, is done. Like people could, easily have like these community armories or something where like certain individuals in the community are barred from taking guns out of it. There's like all kinds of hypothetical scenarios that the supply chain could change depending on the plan of action in the community. There's all kinds of ways that firearms could hypothetically be regulated in an anarchist world. But as far as my personal philosophy is concerned, I don't support it, and one of the main reasons is pretty similar to the arguments for a well-regulated militia that were purported by the founding fathers. That in the instance of an authoritarian regime overthrowing democracy, the citizenry, the populace must take it upon themselves to arm themselves and have that personal responsibility to hold the government to account. Be it through forms of protest and civil disobedience, like the Black Panthers walking into the state houses, with open carry firearms to show that, like, we, the oppressed minority, we're watching, we're out there. They used to do cop watches with guns, the Panthers, out in public, open carrying. I think these things are good. Um, and they hold the government to account because it makes the government realize, well, you have to appeal to someone, right? Like the citizenry is active, they're engaged, and and through showing that the citizenry has power, you can thereby exert that power over the government. Firearms are one way to do this. Simply displaying them, possessing them, showing that the will is there to organize and create forms of community self-defense, right? Um, but if, America were to fall to like a one-party dictatorship, all the parties are outlawed, um, the democracy, the power to vote, it's stripped from everybody. Um, the intelligence agencies just get like this insane free reign to like meddle in people's lives like without any kind of Fourth or Fifth Amendment protections. I think that's about time that you get the guns out and you go you go undo the injustices that are occurring. Um, Only in that instance do I think uh, such an armed revolution ought to be necessary. But that's not the world we live in, thankfully. Uh, and so in that sense, it's a last resort. But I think that's the kind of last resort that was being talked about by the founding fathers by um, engendering our Constitution with this Second Amendment. Um, like the only way to ensure that we have a fighting chance in the instance of such a regime um, would be to remove all regulations on firearms. In the state of Wyoming, for example, if you file the proper paperwork, you can literally get a tank. You can have a tank in Wyoming. The Wyoming Constitution allows for that. If you file the right paperwork, you can have automatic weapons. And for those of us who are crafty, obviously not me, but for people who are smarter than me, it's totally possible to make bombs, drones, any number of, remote control weapons that, could be used against this hypothetical state. It's not like there's no fighting chance. I feel like people often hear these arguments that someone like me might make for the Second Amendment, and they assume that there's just no fighting chance whatsoever to rise up against an authoritarian government. There is. I think the problem is, much like the war on terrorism was sold to us as a way of protecting national security, protecting the citizens. I think the war on the Second Amendment is similar, where you have these interest groups and people in power saying, we need to protect people from suicide. We need to protect people from, from gun violence and these sorts of things. When in reality, by taking away firearms from the population, you're not only reducing someone's ability to defend themselves, you're scapegoating firearms to distract from what is the real problem. The real problem in this country, perpetuating gun violence, is mental health. It is poverty. It is a lack of housing. It's
It's not mental health.
You disagree?
Statistically speaking, people with mental health problems are no more likely to commit violent acts than the rest of the population. It's a scapegoat. They're always doing it. The government, they're like, the people we don't like, they're mentally ill. It's a justification to lock us away and kill us. It's not mental health. I disagree.
Okay, well, come here. Let's disagree.
Okay.
Unironically, the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
I can agree with you on that.
Mm-hmm.
Alright, I'm just gonna crouch down. Slav squat.
Hello. Oh, Don't Smite wants to be in the video now?
No,
It was just loud.
Oh.
I was like, what's going on?
I heard Osaka say something wrong from the other room and I burst into that video.
I see.
Yes.
Have fun.
Okay, so it's not mental health.
It's not.
It's not?
I don't think it is.
Then what do you think it is? I said poverty was the other.
You said that what's driving gun violence in the US?
Is mental health and poverty and like a lack of housing.
I mean, I think it's generally ne'er-do-wellers.
Who is that?
People who they're ne'er doing well. They're ne'er doing well.
What drives them to be ne'er-do-wellers? Criminals, though.
I mean, honestly, this is a very difficult question to answer. I think poverty is definitely a factor. And I think there's something to be said about culture. Like, not, I'm not saying in black neighborhoods or something like that. I'm saying American culture.
Yeah.
Like, sort of desensitizing people to violent acts.
Yeah. That was
because of this, like, individual, like, rugged individual type stuff.
Yeah.
Like, you can see, generally speaking, like countries with stronger, or like places with a stronger sense of community, they don't have the same problems with violence.
Yeah, no, I was actually going to get to that. I do think the culture around firearms in America is extremely toxic. Like the fact that like a lot of the time people's masculinity is directly tied to their ownership and use of a gun, like that's terrible.
It's a penis surrogate.
Yeah, like, and then you tie that into like how when the Puritans came to the United States, and a lot of like the Pilgrims, right? There was this prevailing mindset of like, I have my dog and my gun and my land and my wife and that's it, you know? And like
I also disagree with that.
Wait, you don't think they were rejects from Europe?
No, I think that's true, but
yeah.
If you're saying people in the past had this, like in early American history, had this individualist approach, this is like a modern myth. No, it was basically impossible to be an individualist in like the frontier or whatever. Like all the media we see is like, oh, these people in the frontier, they were like the individualists, just my dog and my gun and nothing else, right? In reality, it wasn't the truth at all. They were just like all pre-industrial communities. They had to all work together to survive. Like you can't live without community. You know, everyone in the community would have done their part.
It's not like they didn't literally have community, but I'm saying like
they had. What I'm saying is that the idea that the American West was built on the backs of this sort of rugged individualism is a modern myth. It's not actually. That ideology is a fairly recent.
Oh, the American West is different. That's a different case. I'm talking about like the settlers, like the literal settlers.
I mean, I still believe that like individualism is came into American culture
from Reagan.
I don't know if it was Reagan. It might be just generally like the rise of sort of consumer capitalism in America, like maybe
suburbs
like reached its suburbs, like that also played into it. Like around the 50s probably is where it peaked. Like all of this sort of like fairly modern era. I think that's what the cause of it is. I think it's a thing about like being a consumer and being like a nuclear family unit and stuff like that.
Well, I would argue that those things are problems, but at the same time, they're symptomatic of like what I think the founding of America was rooted in to some degree this kind of like, if you look at the Puritans and the settlers, like this rugged individualism. Maybe not in the way that it's narrativized by those groups who have like the kind of agenda you're talking about, but I feel like the reason the American dream like could even be pushed on Americans in the first place is because the roots were there, and they're there because of this.
I mean, I think that's a very particular. I think that there are some events that are like factual, and then the way that you narrativize about those events is going to change depending on the culture you're from in the past. Like I think just as easily the idea of the sort of the early settlers or the founding fathers or whatever could have been interpreted as you know, if we had a socialist government or something like that, they could interpret the same myth in a sort of like, we went away from this like degenerate, you know, individualized society where we were outcasts and we joined together in unity and built this grand civilization. You could easily narrativize it about like that way as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that's true. Like, I mean, ultimately, like all like narratives are kind of a problem, but and they're always going to be like not telling the full story. But I feel like the narrative that I'm providing at least has some utility for explaining like why exactly we have the sort of problems we have in the United States and how we can.
I think you're
fix
right.
them.
I just disagree on where you say it started.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. So I think we have 1 minute left in the recording. I can't see from here.
I can't either. My eyesight isn't that good.
Yeah, so it's like.
Why are you so far away from the camera? Yeah, we have 30 seconds.
Okay, closing remarks. No.
I don't know. I have a hair in my mouth.
Basically, I think it's poverty and culture and like job security and also the way houses are built and stuff.
True.
And I think we need more guns, not less.
I think America has a pretty good amount of guns.
I mean, the regulations on firearms in the States, it's just nuts.
I think you should own a musket like the founding fathers intended for home defense.